For people who've been together for a long time?
Yeah, no, you can always quote exceptions to the rule, but the reality is that what we're dealing with here is an institution which has brought stability to society and to relationships, stability that is very, very important. They're becoming more important in a world which is putting more and more pressure on relationship. So we've got to make sure that we don't mess around with that. We've had the circumstances where France has looked at this option and has said, no, we're not going to do this because it opens up too many options to vary relationship and to dilute the concept of marriage. We've had in Holland where it's been introduced. We've had people then immediately go and pursue, for instance, relationships for one man and a number of women, or one woman and a number of men. In other words, the concept of relationship in society gets diluted and it loses the stability which marriage seeks to bring to it.
OK, Bob Brown, let me bring you in. The Jim Wallace view of things is that is the thin edge of the wedge, then everything goes to pieces.
Yeah, it's a certain wowserism there, and a failure to extend to other people the exact same rights that Jim wants for himself. And and if you want to extend monogamy and you want to extend stability, then you certainly extend the privilege, which it is, of marriage under the law to everybody. And it's about equality. It's not about sympathy. It's about equality. The majority of Australians, in the Galaxy poll done last year, 2-to-1 majority almost of Australians back marriage for same-sex couples. It's Catholic Belgium and Catholic Spain have got the option, so is Canada, so is South Africa and Scandinavian countries. It's inevitable that we're going that way, but there's a blockage by politicians, and John Howard was the exemplar of that, by a very tiny minority lobby trying to take the rights of more than 1 million Australians to have access to their union and their love for each other being recognised in public the same as everybody else's.
Jody, I'd just like to take up, if I could, a couple of those points. I mean, there's not 1 million Australians out there. There are 49,500 same-sex couples in the last ABS census, and we're always been presented by inflated figures from the homosexual lobby, which for years told us there was 10% of the population. We now know is around 2%. The reality is here that there's not a screaming majority for this. In Tasmania, where you have relationships registers, you have 0.02% of the population of Tasmania taking advantage of that. Now, we are not in a position, and we shouldn't be in a position of democracy, where we overturn, compromise a fundamental institution in society for that small a proportion of the population.
Really, this is a battle, though, about words, isn't it? Because in the end, same-sex couples in Australia, Jim Wallace, are going to be given the same legal rights as married couples, are they not? So in the end, you're only quibbling about the actual word marriage.
I'm quibbling about retaining and protecting the concept of marriage. The concept of marriage is about stability. It brings stability into relationship, which is essential for children. We know, for instance, in Australia, and we see on our TV screens every night, that we have a high rate of abuse of children and physical violence against children. And yet at the same time, we know that only 2% of those children, or 2% of fathers, biological fathers, actually occasion that damage. So what we're saying here is that if we have a traditional family, we have biological parents both there with the family, we have a lot more stability for both the partners and also for the children in that relationship.
Yes, but can I just get you the answer to the point that I just made, though? If the legal changes go through, that are going to go through inevitably under this government, same-sex couples will have the same legal rights as a married couple, will they not?
No, they have many of the same legal rights, but it's still to be determined how many of those rights at the federal level will be passed on. I'm not personally against equal, particularly financial rights, but I am absolutely adamant that we must retain in society an ideal, which we call marriage, an ideal of relationship, which aims to put stability, commitment up there right at the fore. And that needs to be held before our children as an example. It needs to be held before society as an example.
All right,
because it's been proven.
Let me go to Bob Brown. Bob Brown, are we really having an argument about symbols here? I mean, is it in fact the symbol of marriage, the marriage ceremony that we're talking about here?
Well, it's one of the things, but as you can hear from Jim there, there's a far greater distinguishment and discrimination inherent in what he is the so-called Australian Christian lobby, and let me make this point, that most Australian Christians, if the opinion polls are right, favour same-sex unions being able to go to marriage. But the argument being used by Jim here is the same one that was argued by the anti-abolitionists in favour of slavery and then against women getting the vote. This is a civilising move towards equality, towards taking away discrimination in a society which recognises that as the bedrock of fairness in society, and extending marriage to same-sex couples is going to extend stability, and it extends an equality which allows people, as we saw in the lead-in, to celebrate their love for each other, which we should be enhancing with their loved ones and with their families and by society. And it's a fundamentally reasonable and simple thing to do, but it's opposed by bigots. It's opposed by people, and they're very, very highly organised, and unfortunately they've been blocking the will of the majority of people in Australia. And it's time the Rudd government took a stand on this, and thank goodness the ACT government is pursuing the legislation it had, which was overridden by the Howard government and which now should be brought into law.
Jim Wallace, let me ask you. I'll let you make your point and then we'll go.
No, we're continually being presented here with false information. The majority of Christians would never endorse, as Mr Brown has said, homosexual marriage. Secondly, you know, he talks about Christians trying to retain slavery. It was the Christian Clapham sect and the motivation of Wilberforce.
Seriously, we are getting a little bit off the topic there. No, we're getting a bit off the topic.
Yeah, well,
Jim Wallace,
I think though we've got to hold.
Jim Wallace, let me ask you about.
We've got to hold the senator to fact.
All right, let me ask you about this question about John Stanhope and what he's doing in the ACT. You've accused him of having a social engineering agenda. Do you think he's trying to put the Rudd government on the spot here, to have to make a serious decision like John Howard did, or not make the same decision that John Howard did, to veto his legislation?
Well, I think Mr Stanhope runs his own agenda, and I don't think he cares who he embarrasses in this. He already passed homosexual adoption. As a result of that, we saw a baby given away to a male-male couple in West Australia just recently. And it doesn't worry Mr Stanhope that broke a long-held convention that government should always act in the best interest of the child. So I think Mr Stanhope is trying to get his place in a page in Australia's social history. And nothing will stop him doing that, because clearly he's going to embarrass the government. This government has made a pre-election promise. It is also now sitting not just as a Labor government, but as the federal government of Australia. And as such, it has a constitutional responsibility to overturn any laws which are in conflict with federal law.
Bob Brown, do you think the government really has no choice if John Stanhope brings down this legislation once again, other than to do pretty much what John Howard did, and that is to veto it, because that's what's in their party platform. That's what they promised.
Well, this is a test for the Labor. But let me first say, though, I want to go back to the business about same-sex couples raising children in a loving household. And what we see is wonderful relationships there, and children getting a marvellous upbringing where that occurs. And the test of whether children should be parented is the love that parents give to their children. Now, moving on from that, the Stanhope government is making a stand on behalf of its electorate. The people of the ACT voted for the Stanhope government, knowing this was on their policy platform. And we've got the Howard government overriding the democratic wishes of the people of the Australian Capital Territory. Let's hope that the Rudd Labor government doesn't do that and doesn't go with this vociferous and outdated minority viewpoint that there should be discrimination under the law against people simply on the basis of sexuality.
But what if the Rudd... In a moment, Jim, just hang on for a second, Jim Wallace. I just want to just cover this point quickly. What if the Rudd government, Bob Brown, simply passed I think it's 58 separate pieces of legislation which will end discrimination for same-sex couples?
Well, we'll have moved in the right direction, but they need to remove the discrimination if you're going to do that, why not go the 59th step and remove discrimination altogether, and we will have a much fairer, more loving, caring and stable society as a result of that.
Okay, Jim Wallace, you were trying to get in there and I interrupted you.
Well, this is not about discrimination against homosexual people. This is about discriminating for marriage and for families, and for reinforcing. We're at a stage in society where we need to reinforce the institution of marriage. We need to reinforce family, and what we mustn't do is import into it concepts of relationship, of commitment in relationship, which are quite foreign to marriage. Instead, we've got to reinforce those concepts that have proven marriage to be a great benefit to society throughout history.
Okay, well, no doubt this debate will continue over the next few weeks, thanks to John Stanhope and others. We thank you very much, both of you, Bob Brown and Jim Wallace, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.